Give me another crazy date.
Okay, so one time I went to omakase with this guy who ended up having a swastika tattoo that he just got. Like, it was like fresh.
And anyone at the restaurant could see this?
There were like 10 people there total. It was a really intimate counter, actually.
Did you ask him about it, like why he got it?
Yeah, and I was like, what is it? And he was like, well, what do you think it is? And I was like, it looks like a swastika. He was like, this is about something that's so much bigger than what you think it is.
That's the worst answer.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Now I was actually going to make a video first this week on basically Mr. Beast being the first like YouTube billionaire versus like loads of YouTubers going broke and just talk about like that kind of thing. And I'm going to talk about that this week. But just over the weekend, my video about like far-right men not being able to get dates has got a lot of traction. So I thought I'd make a little follow-up video to that. And there was actually something I wanted to talk about a couple months ago, and you might have seen it, that journalist dated a bunch of right-wing men. And I guess in America, a right-wing man, we'd probably understand them as like a far-right man in the European context, because in the video I made last week, I was talking about Reform UK members who were at university talking about why it was hard to get dates, and offered up like, you know, very clearly why they struggle is because they are misogynist and can't really help themselves saying so.
Especially on Hinge profiles, you know, you've got your political views, you know, you put like conservative, you know, you put like reform, and you know, anything far right, you know, they look at you differently.
When you see the liberal woman over here, I mean, just being a man, they're going to look at you and think you're racist or whatever, because that's just the assumptions they make. But a lot of men will probably just be afraid to go to talk to women, because these days you can just say hello to a woman and they can blow it out of proportion. They can do many things.
And I know I've spoken about this before, but I was reading some of the stuff of this video, and what's even more wild is, obviously, I would say conservatives in America are maybe more willing to offer up their racism. I would say being like an outward racist to everyone you meet in public is more American than British. I'm not saying, for people who might take that out of context, that British people aren't racist and that British people don't say racist things in public or won't say a racist thing to you in public. But I just feel like because of the American political culture, where Americans feel more emboldened to not even pay lip service to some sort of baseline liberal like identity politics, it's just the worst problem. Like, for example, in the video I made last week, we were talking about people who had wanted to run for reform in the election but had left the party because of the misogyny and racism, right? And if we look at the Tory party, you know, it has a black female leader. There are like loads of minority MPs in the party previously in the government, and there's obviously been several conservative female prime ministers. So this overt misogyny and racism, like very publicly, is probably not going to be expressed as much to the public from conservatives just talking to random people, right? I guess that's what I mean. But what you're going to see today is, through different people's experiences, American conservative men are very happy to offer up that information like the first time they chat with anyone who they might potentially have some sort of connection with. And one thing I wanted to address quickly as well is, lots of people said that what I was talking about was bullshit, because if a man is good looking, it doesn't matter what his politics are. So if a man is good looking, even if he's conservative, yes, he probably is going to have more success in the dating world, but that still doesn't really set them up for a long-lasting, meaningful relationship, because their politics and their worldview is still going to come through in that relationship, where you probably can't actually ignore it, even if they are like really good looking. And also, being really good looking on the surface might be great in the early stages of dating, but I've spoken about this recently with someone. If you are really, really in shape, like in insanely good shape, and you live like a pretty normal life, like conventional 9 to 5, that pretty much means like your hobby and most of your spare time is spent like at the gym, probably would make you a less interesting person to a potential partner. Anyway, that type of thing in terms of fitness culture, I want to talk about at some point as well. But yeah, let's get into the video. Let's look more at the American context, because we looked at the British context for the first one. And also, before we go any further, if you like my content, maybe subscribe to the channel. Trying to hit 200k subscribers at some point in the near future. And also follow me on social media at the Kavernacle, on Blue Sky, on Instagram. Got a couple other Instagrams as well, my travel and gaming one. And also, if you want to support my work going forward, check out my Patreon page and check out YouTube memberships. And let's get into the rest of the video. So just to frame this in the American context, I read an article today, it's kind of weird, by Suzanne Blake at Newsweek, saying Gen Z's gender political divide creating problems for their dating lives. Now, I'm reading this article because it gives an okay breakdown, but the thesis of the author about it being important to date people outside your politics and why that might be necessary for a good society, I thought was interesting, and I don't agree with it. But she writes here, America's youngest adult generation is growing more politically divided along gender lines, and that divide appears to be influencing how they approach romantic relationships. As young women lean liberal and young men trend conservative, dating across party lines is becoming increasingly uncommon. While older generations, including millennials, appear more willing to bridge the ideological gaps, Gen Z is redefining what constitutes a deal breaker. Why it matters, so I thought this was interesting. If young adults increasingly refuse to form relationships across ideological lines, that could reinforce echo chambers, reduce empathy, and limit the potential for political compromise in everyday life. As romantic relationships often influence long-term community ties and even voting behavior, the polarization seen in dating may contribute to deeper societal divisions over time. Sociologists and political scientists warn that when a person's identity becomes tightly aligned with partisanship, it can erode trust in mixed ideology households and communities. And with Gen Z expected to become the largest voting bloc in the next decade, their unwillingness to bridge political divides could have long-lasting effects on the nation's political cohesion. So I can understand this argument if we're actually talking about like society in general, right? So here's a good example. If you're going to go into like electoral politics as a leftist, you're going to have to entertain that you're going to maybe have to work with people who have radically different politics with you in terms of actual work in things like parliament. And also, you're going to try and get people to vote for you who socially, at least, might not agree with your politics and maybe on a whole host of issues don't agree with your politics. So for the goodness of society, you're going to have to try and bridge that divide. And for left-leaning people like myself, it usually is focus on economic things that like 98% of us all like care about the most, and you can get more people on board that way. And that's not like a radical message, but I do not think romantic relationships have to play their role in that. Like when it's talking about it can reinforce echo chambers, reduce empathy, and limit the potential for political compromise, I don't really understand why dating is the main part of this. And also, like, at this point in American political culture, you're asking, like, probably most of the population to date people who don't see them as equal and want to strip their rights away. Because when I read a lot of polls like this in the American context, they usually frame it between, like, Democrat and Republican. But then if we expand that, let's think about, okay, how many of you watching this right now who might be more like far left, like myself, would you date someone who is more liberal but doesn't really care about politics, right? Like, you know they're a good person. They might just vote the Democrats because they think they're good. But fundamentally, you know you agree on most issues, right? Like, I don't think that is as much of an issue. Like, people who are left-wing dating, like, more liberal people, or people maybe don't care about politics as much. I don't think that's the issue, because if you can recognize that the person you're dating might not care about politics as much, but they care about equality, you share the same morals and values, you can easily overlook that, okay, maybe this person votes for the Lib Dems or some shit like that, right? I think it's a bit different when it's like, you have your leftists, you have your liberals, and then you have like loads of open fascists who range from wanting to strip your rights away to like actually wanting some sort of like Bible-based dictatorship. Like, that's what you're trying to have to engage with. So the tone of this is just like so mad to me. Like, you do not owe people dates for the goodness of society or something. Like, that is so bizarre to me. And I don't think it is necessarily in line with the, you know, what you actually have to do in politics is organize with people who you might not agree with in terms of every little thing. But yeah, when you're talking about a romantic relationship, which might involve like actually raising children, it's probably good if you believe the same things, especially in terms of things like LGBT rights, for example, because what if you have a gay or transgender child? And I would argue like that is worse for societal cohesion, that you're going to expose these children to like one of their parents being a raging bigot, which is going to give them loads of issues going forward, right? So I would argue completely against that. And it also appears to not be like a huge problem anyway. So recent data from eHarmony's 2025 dating diaries found that 28% of Gen Z singles said differing political views could cause them to turn down a date. So that's like over 2/3 of people in the survey said it's not a deal breaker. The tone of that initial part of the article from the author is very weird. And thankfully the article includes some quotes. And I'll just read this one because it makes the most sense. So Brian Driscoll, a HR consultant who focuses on generational differences, told Newsweek, Gen Z doesn't separate politics from dating because they can't. They watched their rights get gutted. Roe was overturned before some of them could even vote. Their LGBTQ plus friends are being targeted by lawmakers with nothing better to do. Climate change is on fire. College costs more than an Italian sports car. And every entry-level job wants 5 years of experience to minimum wage. They're not going to swipe right on someone who calls all this just a difference of opinion. So yeah, that is fundamentally just the main thing that, like, especially with conservatives, your whole ideology revolves around propping up and agreeing with the status quo, or trying to like make society worse. And even if they might agree with you with some of these issues, right, like they're still going to vote for the politicians who most like overtly say, yeah, we're just going to make your lives worse and make the lives of the rich better. So if you don't want to spend like most of your life with that person, I think that makes loads of sense. But also something that is interesting in the American context as well, like I said, that these right-wing men really don't seem to have a filter. Now, in the video we watched last week, they were obviously on a political YouTube channel talking about political issues, right? So they're offering up this information to the host. And whether or not they say it to women on the first date, is up for debate, really. But I found this post. I'm going to go off and talk about the woman who dated like right-wing men to speak about her experience. So a post on 2X chromosomes, dating as a liberal woman in a red state is weird. And I just want to read their second experience. My next experience was a little longer. I had been texting with him for a couple of days and he asked if I wanted to FaceTime him. And so I figured, why not? He seemed nice enough and we had been getting along. During the FaceTime call, I brought up the fact that the Walmart near where I live is well known to be like an awful Walmart, and was complaining about having to grocery shop there since it's the most convenient and cheapest place by me. He then went on this rant about if you go 30 minutes south into the suburbs, the Walmart is so much better and nothing is locked up. And that's where all the white people are. And I was genuinely taken off guard. How is it so normal for someone to say some racist shit in the first actual conversation you have with someone? I ended up hanging up on him and told him that he should probably reconsider being outwardly racist in the first phone call he has with a woman. It's so weird to me that these men will hide behind a not political affiliation, or not even have anything on their profile about their political views, especially in the world we live in. Be upfront about your views. All it does is lead to weird interactions like this. If you're concerned that women won't date you because of your political views, maybe you should reconsider those. So that interaction is actually something a lot of people like left me similar stories in the comments of my videos talking about this in the American context. And it's just like absolutely like wild that these people think it's like an uncontroversial opinion to offer up. Like that's what I mean when I say Americans don't even have this filter of realizing like maybe you shouldn't say that. I know some conservatives would probably be a bit more like tactical and they would drop this more subtly and maybe a lot longer into some sort of like romantic relationship with someone. But yeah, I've seen so many people say stuff like this, and I've also said in the last video, and lots of people are agreeing with me, especially if you're a straight white man, a lot of men lie and they won't be upfront about this. You can understand in straight relationships for Gen Z women why they want to filter this out as quick as possible, because that's the level of insane like racism that is so open now that we're dealing with, that they're not even pretending. So you're really going to try and build like some sort of life with someone who is just like this absolute Nazi, right? But this isn't a like unique experience, and you guys would have seen this going viral. And it's a journalist called Vera Papisova, and she spent time dating conservative men and using a conservative dating app. And it's just so wild, the story she tells. And weirdly enough, actually, Walter Masterson posted a video yesterday interviewing her about this. And go watch that video, but I'll just play you one or two of the like insane things she said before reading her article about it published back in February.
And he got into the school system and he was saying like, all this white guilt is poisoning white kids. And I was like, what white guilt? Like, I didn't know. Okay. I didn't know about this. So I'm explaining to you the way that if this is redundant or like, had never heard any of this. So I was just like, okay, what white guilt in the schools? This is when I realized this is what they are talking about when they think the school system is like too woke. So it's basically just like teaching accurate American history, I guess. Said that creating healthy white family units is how we can begin to erase what's like the damage that's being done. When he said, do you want to go to church instead of getting a drink? I said, yeah. And so then on the date where we went to church, I really thought there was like a part of me where I was like, I can fix him. When we went to the church, I asked him, what are you looking for in a girlfriend? What are you looking for in a wife? He said, biblical patriarchy. Church was the first date.
That was the first date.
Yeah. So everything that I described up until church, like that was just talking.
He gave you all of that before you even met him at church.
We weren't even talking about politics. We were talking about like, why did he choose this restaurant? Because I was like, this is a first date, but I've been here on like a 1-year anniversary date. And he was like, oh, like during the pandemic, all I did was go to restaurants by myself and I would keep a list of all my favorite desserts in the city. And I was like, oh, do you make a lot of lists? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, well, what other kind of lists do you make? He literally said lists about what lies liberal white women tell about Donald Trump.
So I get in this context that these men like think she is like more conservative, but it's still kind of wild because it's like they just are so not aware of just kind of like the general baseline that the so-called liberal West has kind of just normalized to everyone of a certain generation where, yeah, if you go on a date with someone who's like not religious and tell them you want biblical patriarchy, they're not going to like that. Like, they're not born in like the 1950s or even earlier. And it's just wild to me that it just feels like, obviously with certain men, especially younger men, even saying stuff like this, it just feels like they're just being radicalizing themselves online and reading the most incel shit on like Twitter. Like you see a lot of this like return to tradition shit on Twitter. I've actually made a whole video about it. And I think it just shows with a lot of these people, they don't have great contact with the real world in terms of like positive contact with the real world. So they're just reading so much of this filth online. But she actually wrote a whole article about this for Cosmopolitan. And I want to talk about some of the things she said and some of the like dates she described. On the app I'd ultimately go with, I presented myself truthfully as a Republican curious woman, tired of Democrats' hopelessness and constant pivoting during a highly charged election campaign. I come from a liberal background, I explained in my initial chats with matches, but was open to new perspectives. I used Veronica as my app name, listed my actual age, and uploaded a few real photos that worked through the provided prompt. I answered ones asking what I love about America, but skipped fill in the blanks about my thoughts on January 6th. I think this might be like the Right Stuff dating app, which I made a video on as well back in the day. So from May to November, all in all, I'd see 14 of my matches in person and go on 26 dates. My selection process was straightforward. Before swiping right, I sorted through bios that included guys comparing the violence of Jan 6 to how violent they are in bed, phrasing that they stated they believed in 2 genders only. Many profiles I read included the word pure blood, about people being unvaxxed, and one man who loves Tucker Carlson wrote that dating someone who agrees with him politically is more important than ever. I came across 4 different profiles mentioning a hatred of women with pink hair. I asked every man I messaged about his relationship expectations and family values. Each seemed to know exactly what he was looking for in a wife and articulated it before we ever met. She was typically an unvaccinated Christian white woman willing to quit a job and commit to homeschooling children. Her hobbies might include tending to a garden and feeding the animals. So she talks about the guy she went on a date with who was talking about biblical values, and this is just wild. So she says, as we admired a panel of stained glass, I asked him about the term biblical patriarchy, popular online among a set of women who call themselves anti-feminist. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord, Tom recited. For the husband is the head of the wife as Christ is the head of the church. I asked Tom what he thought a biblical woman even is. He says women should be submissive to their husbands and some people believe they should be trained. It's about knowing your role in nature. It's undesirable for women to be too independent. As a man, I want to take care of you and I believe in that biology. The liberal women I've dated emasculate men. So one more, and I think this one just takes it all. I went on a date with someone called Matthew, 25, from New Jersey, who was going off about how he should have never let a woman be head of the Secret Service. With each course, I fired off questions about his upbringing. He mentioned online groups where there are people, others like him, the kind where people whose radical to me beliefs find validation, and even more than validation, identity itself. Matthew later revealed he has a swastika tattoo. So I'd say the state of dating in terms of conservative men is not going well, and this is what I want to keep like reiterating is about the baseline. So what she's saying here, she's trying to date conservative men, and nearly every single one is like a neo-Nazi at this point, right? So that's what I'm saying. Like when people used to say Republican versus Democrat, they're talking about like Bill Clinton versus George Bush or Nixon versus Kennedy or something like that. Something when the parties were a bit more like close together in what they believed. Like even like Mitt Romney versus Obama 2012, right? Like it's not exactly the same thing, but you can clearly see the center was more close together than it is now. And now, when you're saying, like, oh, like, I can't get a date because I'm a conservative, you're not saying that. Now I talk about Dune in every video, but, like, Frank Herbert, the author of Dune, was a libertarian conservative, right? But when you heard him kind of talk about, like, his ideology for society, it's kind of like, I don't agree with it, but I understand where you're coming from. But nowadays, it's not like, oh, I don't think we should be reliant on the state and we should, like, grow our own crops and, like, build this community. It's more like, oh yeah, no, I want biblical patriarchy where women are my slaves. And that is just like a normal thing to go out on a date with a woman and say to them. And again, this is in like New Jersey and New York. She isn't in like the Bible Belt or anything like that. And they're still feeling very comfortable putting this forward. And the kind of article we talked about right at the start saying, oh, like, you know, it might build echo chambers and all this shit. I really think people often overcomplicate even the political side because, yeah, I totally agree. You need someone with compatible values to build this life with, and that is reflective in politics. You cannot divorce your values from your politics. But at the same time, I think I speak for a lot of left-leaning people generally, we aren't complete Puritans on absolutely everything. There is just a baseline that you want in most people you'd consider a relationship with, even a friendship with. And on paper, you'd probably want that closer to you. But if you have like great chemistry and you have a lot of shared interests outside of that, I'm sure a lot of people would forsake having one-for-one politics to have this relationship. But like I said, that's not what's being done here. This isn't what the divide is about. The divide is people who genuinely believe in some sort of social equality and viewing everyone as equal versus like actual Nazis and people who believe in the equality not wanting to give the Nazis a chance in the hope that they can maybe do the emotional labor of showing them the light and stuff. In this case, trying to rehabilitate far-right men by dating them just sounds like the most absolutely insane thing ever because it's such a choice in especially the UK context to take that next step of no, I'm not just going to be a conservative supporter. I'm going a step further and I'm just going to be like a reform UK member and actually just be openly xenophobic, bigoted, all this other crap, right? As the Overton window shifts, I'm not surprised to see this divide, but like at the same time, you can't blame people for not wanting to go along with that. So anyway, I just thought I'd do a little like follow up for my last video, but that is it for the video. Let me know what you guys think. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.